So we started the last chapter of the Bhagwad Gita, chapter 18, Moksha Sannyasa Yoga, or the yoga of liberation through renunciation. So it is the longest chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 78 verses. And actually, it is the executive summary or the final conclusions of what the Lord Krishna has been teaching us or has been telling us over the previous chapters. And therefore, we are flitting from topic to topic and subject to subject. And it starts with the distinction between sannyas and tyag. And we started with the sattvic rajasic tyag. Now we are putting everything in the framework of the three gunas that we had talked, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So we started the chapter with distinction between sannyas and tyag. Then we talked of sattvic, rajasic, tamasic tyag. And we then moved on to analysis of action and its causes, incentives or the motivations, and the components of action. All right. And then we move to knowledge, the sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic knowledge or gyan. And we also talked about karma and karta, so action and actor. And last time, in the last session that we had, we talked about the buddhi and sattvic, rajasic, tamasic buddhi. And today, what we have lined up is actually dhriti or the steadfastness. So the breakup is broadly like this, verse wise. Verse 1 and 1 to 6 talked about sannyas, renunciation, and tyag, giving up or relinquishment. And 7 to 12, we talked about sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic tyag. Tyag we talked about because tyag is what is we need to practice. Once we practice tyag, relinquishment renunciation or sannyas will automatically follow. So that is a effect. So we need to focus on tyag. So that is what we had focused on. Then verses 13 to 18 talked about why we act or the causes, the motivation, and the components of action. And 19 to 28, we talked about the knowledge, gyan, karma, action, karta, actor. So this was with respect to the three gunas, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And 29 onwards, we started talking about sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic buddhi and dhriti. I mean, so today we are going to cover dhriti, and the next session we will talk about sukha or happiness. So this is broadly the breakup of the verses and what we are going to cover in this chapter, overview of the chapter. And I will start with recapping the last set of verses that we did, which was the sat, the buddhi, the three fold categorization of intellect. And we will, when we start today's verses, we will again go back to why buddhi is important for dhriti or steadfastness. So, verse number 30 said that the intellect that knows activity and renunciation, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, fear and fearlessness, bondage and liberation. That is Satvik, O Partha. So that was verse number 30, where we talked of the Satvik Buddhi. So the words used were pravritim, cha nivritim, activity and renunciation, that intellect which knows the difference between these two. Karya, akarya, what ought to be done, what ought not to be done. Bhay, abhay, what ought to be feared and what is fearlessness. Bandhanam and moksham, bondage and liberation. So that was verse number 30. Verse number 31 talked of the Rajasic intellect. So the intellect which wrongly understands righteousness, or dharma, and unrighteousness, adharma, and also what ought to be done, karya, and what ought not to be done, akarya, that, O Partha, is called rajasic. So essentially, the rajasic intelligence or buddhi is confused between dharma or righteousness and unrighteousness, and consequently, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. And that is, as we had discussed, arises essentially from the attachment and selfish goals. So I, me, myself attitude. Verse number 32 talked of the tamasic intellect. The intellect developed or enveloped in darkness, which regards unrighteousness, adharm, as righteousness, dharm, and all things perverted. That, O Parth, is called tamasic. So the tamasic buddhi has a has incorrect, I mean opposite understanding of what is dharm and adharm, and all things appear topsy turvy to a tamasic intellect. So such an intellect arises actually from darkness or ignorance, and this intellect is called tamasic. So let's start with today's verses. Today we have got verses 33, 34, and 35 lined up. I will chant. Verse number 33. धृतया यया धार्यते मनः प्राणेन्द्रिया क्रिया योगेन व्यभिचारिण्या धृति स पार्थ सात्विकी. So the verse translates to the steadfastness with which one holds or supports or sustains the activities of the mind, the pranaha, our vital breath, and senses, unswerving through yoga. That steadfastness, O Parth, is sattvic. So now let's take this upward, word by word. Dhritaya. So this is the steadfastness as in the verb. Okay, so dhriti is steadfastness, dhritaya becomes by steadfastness. Yaya, by which, dharyate, धारण करते हैं या holds, supports, upholds. Manah, prani, indriya, kriya. So that's the word. Manah is man, prana is our vital breath, and indriya are our senses. Kriya is activity. So this becomes manha prani indriya kriya, translates to activities of mind, prana, the life-giving force, and our senses. Yogain. Yog is the practice of yoga, and yogain becomes by yoga. Avyabhicharana becomes steady or unswerving with complete focus and steadfastness. Dhriti. Now, this is the adjective dhriti that we are talking about in these set of verses, that steadfastness. So that Parth, oh Parth, Satviki is the guna, Satvik. So the verse translates to the steadfastness with which one holds, supports the activities of the mind, pranaha, vital breath, and senses, unswerving through yoga. That steadfastness, O Parth, is sattvic. So let's chant it together. धृतया यया धार्यते मना प्राणेन्द्रिया क्रियाः योगेन व्यभिचारिण्याः धृति सा पार्थ सात्विकी. So now let's just elaborate the context, because we had a break of almost a month. So, where are we coming from? We had talked about action and actor in earlier set of verses. And the idea of Lord Krishna was to explain action and the kind of actors. But what happens is that action is guided and controlled by our buddhi. What is buddhi? We translate it to intellect, or it is our capacity to think and reason. It is our ability to grasp what is happening around us, our intellectual capacity of understanding, discriminating, and choosing a course of action. And discrimination is what distinguishes between right and wrong. So, this is also used, abuddhi, and discrimination is actually also used to understand and gain knowledge or jnanam. So, because once we know of something, then we will be able to understand it, right? So, that is how this is the relevance of buddhi in the context that we are talking. Now, dhriti. Dhriti is steadfastness, firmness, will, fortitude, or it is the faithful consistency of purpose and self application. The determination that keeps the constituent elements of our body active and focused towards a particular goal. So, it is the faculty of constantly keeping an idea in the mind and consistently working on it till we reach its logical conclusion. It ends, the activity that we have chalked out for ourselves. Without this steadfastness, disallows us to swerve or get blown around like a dry leaf in even the gentlest of breeze. The will is a quality of the intellect, so it comes under buddhi actually, and it was one of the qualities that we had discussed uh, in both the bhakta, that was chapter 12, and the jnani, chapter 30, right? So this is the context of buddhi and dhriti. These two are factors that impact the quality and the quantity of work that or activities, our tasks, our ability that we have enact with in the world. So they not only propel action or motivate action, but also direct it in a particular direction and then control. It's just like the horse has those, panels on either side so that the focus remains in the front and the horse doesn't move. So this is dhriti, it maintains our focus. And it affects the entire human personality. Both are required. So both buddhi and dhriti are required to complete any action. And that is why we have started discussing buddhi, intellect, and dhriti, steadfastness, again in these set of the last three verses and today's verses with respect to the threefold gunas. And buddhi was covered, of course, in verses 30, 31, and 32 of this chapter, which we just recapped. Now, this verse is covering Sattvic Dhriti, which upholds, sustains, supports all activities of ours, all activities, as the verse is pointing out, of the mind, vital breath, and senses. So, mind is our ability to think, reason, and vital breath is what enables, once we take it in, it enables all our organs, and senses are again which take us into the world, actually, they're outward going. So, our entire personality is controlled towards or directed towards yoga. That's what the word is used here. Now, what is yoga? We have been discussing this again. Yoga is inward turning. If we are an outward going personality, we start moving inwards. We change our direction. This happens when we realize or when we understand that true happiness does not lie in the world outside, it resides in each one of us. And actually, it's not there in what we see, a relationship or, uh, let's say, a item of clothing or something that we like to eat. It's not there. Actually, it's there, but it is fleeting, transient. The eternal happiness, the true bliss is within each one of us, through which we are connected with that Paramatman. So, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Gyan Yoga are the three principal yogas at the level of the body, mind, and intellect, respectively, that we are talking about in this verse, which connect us to that reality, supreme reality at all times. So, through these three disciplines of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Gyan Yoga, we reduce our desires, withdraw from the world, gain peace of mind or equanimity, so that our faculties are available to us to focus on that supreme reality. And we have been reading about these three yogas uh, in detail in certain chapters from chapter 2 onwards. And actually, they constitute the three parameters of our self development: the inner strength, inner purity, and inner clarity. So these are the three parameters that actually lead to our development or self development. Inner strength is not going to the gym or having a powerful body. Okay, that's a physical requirement, fine, you do it. But more importantly, it is our strength or the ability to deal with the fluctuations of life, to deal with the pairs of opposites. It's something that all of us face, whether we are rich or poor, powerful or weak. So it is our inner strength which gives us the capability to withstand the ups and downs of life, our inner stability, and the ability to treat life as a game, as an adventure, and learn new things and face each situation that comes our way in the to the best of our capability without agitating ourselves. So this is inner strength. Inner purity is acting without motive, never thinking what is it in it for me. All right, so always we have an axe to grind. Actually, this is inner purity is one attribute that we find lacking to a large extent in most of our endeavors. So we normally have an agenda when we are, even talking to someone or going out, there is an agenda. Krishna meets us without an agenda. It really didn't matter to him whether who won the war, he is there without an agenda. Inner clarity, the capacity to discriminate. So the capacity to interpret information and determine what is right and wrong, what is dharmic and adharmic, so that we are able to align with the right values. And see, we interpret the same information. So if you see a table or chairs, a person will see it, an average intelligent, a person with average intelligence will see it as a table and chair piece of wood. Scientists will see it as, atoms and molecules and so on and so forth. The saint, the rishi, will see it as relative reality. So, or relative truth. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. So, the rishi has the clarity between the relative and the absolute truth, but all of us are actually perceiving the same thing, but we interpret it differently. This relates directly to our inner clarity, which is, of course, buddhi. Now, we need to constantly and patiently put in effort in these three practices or three yogas so that we are able to progress on our path of knowledge of the self. And through these three practices or three yogas, our mind becomes disciplined, and develops the capacity to rule over the senses and the body. So the dhriti, firmness or steadfastness with which we control our senses, discipline our vital breath, and control the mind is sattvic dhriti, or the determination, steadfastness in the mode of goodness. That is sattva, mode of goodness. So sattvic dhriti is a direct result or a direct function of the sattvic buddhi. That intelligence which distinguishes dharma from adharma, karma from akarma, and moksha from bandhana, as we just said. This process, see, at times we are very clear as to what is the correct course of action, what is bondage, what is liberation. At times we are not. So the process is slow, and we need to control, have determination and control. But that is the only way towards eternal bliss and peace. And in times, as we progress on our spiritual journey, we will realize the self. It is like buddhi is the compass which is showing us the direction. And so you see, the pole star is actually showing you north, and the rest of the directions you can figure out. So you know where you have to go. But it is the dhriti, which, or the steadfastness, which takes us in that direction. So such steadfastness or steady self effort, which aligns with the Supreme Self and puts us unswervingly on the path of yoga, is sattvic dhriti. So, controlling our organs of perception and action, mind in yoga, union, seeking union with the self, or hooked onto a higher goal, with the steadfastness for not allowing it to slip into the world. So 1 second we are able to think of the self, and for 5 seconds we are in the world. So that is not the point. The point is, for all 6 seconds we are only thinking of the self. So the steadfastness which does not allow us to slip into the world and sensual pleasures, but remains, allows it to remain hooked on to that Paramatman, is Sattvic Dhriti. And that is the path for moksha or liberation. So this was verse number 32. Moving on to verse number 33. Dhritaya yaya dharyate mana pranendriya kriya yoge. I'm sorry, we should have moved on to verse number 34. Please bear with me. यया तु धर्मकामार्थानः धृतया धार्यतेऽर्जुनः प्रसङ्गेन फलाकाङ्क्षी धृति सा पार्थ राजसी. So the 34th verse translates to, the steadfastness with which one clings to duty, pleasure, and wealth, O Arjuna, strongly attached and craving for fruit, that steadfastness, O Partha, is called Rajasic. So let's take this up word by word. Yaya, by which, to indeed, dharma, kam, arth, right? Dharma, kama, arthan. So this is duty, or what ought to be done. Kama is pleasure, arth is wealth. Dhrataya, by steadfastness, again as a adverb actually. Dharyate, holds. Arjuna, of course, Arjun. Prasangin, attached, strongly attached. Phalakankshi is desirous of fruit. Dhriti, steadfastness, as in the adjective that we are discussing. Sa, that. Parth is a name for Arjun. Rajasi, guna, rajas. Right? So the steadfastness with which one clings to duty, pleasure, and wealth, O Arjuna, strongly attached and craving for fruit, that steadfastness, O Parth, is called Rajasic. So let's chant it together. यया तु धर्मकामार्थानः धृतया धार्यतेऽर्जुन प्रसङ्गेन फलाकाङ्क्षी धृति सा पार्थ राजसी. So we come now to the Rajasic dhriti, steadfastness. So what the verse is saying, the steadfastness with which a person or an individual holds fast to duty, dharma, wealth, earth, and pleasure, motivated by growing desire to enjoy the fruit of each one of them and also attached to the activity, is termed as Rajasic dhriti. Right? Now, why I change the order is for a reason that if you are familiar with the Indian philosophy, but nevertheless, we'll discuss it in detail here, or actually touch upon it and not discussing it in detail, that it is interesting that Lord Krishna avoids moksha, the word moksha here, and names only the first three of the four duties or the goals that one should have in human life. So, what does our scripture say? In the Indian philosophy, dharma, arth, kam, and moksha are the four pillars or the four goals of human life, right? So, what do they represent? They represent dharma is, of course, righteousness, which affects our moral conduct, our values of life. So, 20 values of chapter 13 for the Jnani and 35 that we had covered in chapter 12 of a Bhakta. Those values that we should inculcate in ourselves, and that is the basis, that is the foundation of what? Of earth, material prosperity. So, once established in moral and ethical values and self discipline, we should seek material wealth. Material wealth which is gained in such a manner where it is on dharma, it's founded on dharma, does not destroy the individual. Then, with such righteous wealth or such noble earnings, we should fulfill kama, our desires. See, we have taken birth because of our vasanas and desires. So, we need to fulfill these. So, we should fulfill our desires or pleasures with moral balance and with discipline. So, such a disciplined life, well lived, fulfilling honest, righteous desires with righteous wealth, earned with righteousness. So, the righteousness is the principle, is the foundation, will take us towards contemplation and moksha, which is the last goal of for prescribed in our scriptures for humankind. What is moksha? Liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So we don't have to do any of this dharma, arth, kam, moksha. We are free from all that. Liberated, we are free. So the pursuit of these goals is a framework for leading a balanced life, where earth and kam are pursued within the framework of dharma, with the aim of attaining moksha. So, dharma is the foundation, earth and kam are what we do to sublimate our vasanas, directing everything towards moksha or that Paramatman. Now, when we are talking of this verse, in verse number 34, which is talking about Rajasic Dhriti, the Rajasic individual is satisfied in the first three fields of self effort. So, dharma, and we will come back to dharma in case of Rajasic buddhi. So, dharma, arth, and kam. The person has no demand for spiritual liberation. That is the implication of this verse. Or the constancy of purpose for such an individual will include the three fields of duty, wealth, and pleasure. So the individual will be pursuing one or the other, and with great attachment and extreme desire, yearning for the fruits. Now, so what happens is that the individual will follow dharma only to go reach the heavens. What it means is having greater and greater comforts and a higher quality of life. Earth for more power and calm to enjoy the, all the sensual pleasures that we can enjoy having the material wealth. So, what is happening is that the Rajasic Dhriti or the Rajasic steadfastness is clinging to the material and sensual motivations only, forgetting the fourth goal of moksha. And this is happening because of attachment and selfish goals. Now, when we talk about dharma, and if dharma is the basis for earth and calm, or wealth and pleasure, it should not matter really. But if you recollect verse number 31 of this chapter, what did the verse say when we were talking about rajasic buddhi? Rajasic buddhi is the intellect that wrongly understands righteousness and unrighteousness, is at times clear and at times is confused that what is dharma and what is adharma, and also between karya and akarya, that means what ought to be done and what ought not to be done. So, and we discussed at that point of time that all actions which arise from ego and egocentric selfish desires are unrighteous or adhar. And actions that arise once we have overcome our ego and attachment are righteous, dhar. Karya are things which need to be done, obligatory action, and akarya are things which we should not do and we should avoid. But the Rajasic Buddhi, colored by attachments and aversions, likes and dislikes, power and honor, is unable to discern the proper course of action. It becomes confused between what is important and what is trivial, the permanent and the transient, and the valuable and the insignificant. Therefore, because the foundation is kind of shaky, the earth and the calm, the next level is also on a shaky foundation. So attachment prevents them from proper uh, perception and conduct. In Rajasic Dhriti, or when we are in the Rajasic mode of action, we tend to cling to dharma or duty. See, our work is our own creation. We impose duties on ourselves. Now, what happens is that first and foremost, Rajasic Dhriti has a confused at times between what is dharmic and what is adharmic. And Rajas in us always pushes us into fervent activity. So this combination makes us like work machines. Seeking what? Seeking calm and earth, or pleasure and wealth. The two motivations, acquiring more and more and enjoying more and more. And most of us, at least 85 or maybe even 90% of the world, is besotted with these two obsessions, acquisition and sensual enjoyments. So our mind is completely preoccupied with these two thoughts. And lost in this material and sensual maze, we have no time to think of higher values. Or, we forget it normally. We remember it when we sit down for a prayer or when we sit down to study the scriptures, then we think of the Lord. So it's not unswerving, as we discussed in the case of Sattvic Dhriti. So the Rajasic Dhriti in us makes us actually focus towards the material and the sensual motivations. And this results in attachment, and we are worried about whether the results will come to us or not. The words used are prasangen, phalakankshi. So much attached and desirous of fruits of action. So attachment and yearning for the fruits of action, this is in the future while engaged in the current action. So the action is based on the attachments of the past. So attachments are always from the past. So we are referring to the past. Fruits are always in the future. So we are thinking of the future while we are acting in the present. So our energies in the present are dissipated, and ultimately we lead to mental stress and fatigue towards the present action. So that was verse number 34. Now we talk about the tamasic dhriti in verse number 35. Yaya swapnam bhayam shokam vishadam madmeva cha न विमुञ्चति दुर्मेधाः धृति सा पार्थ तामसी. So, the steadfastness with which a fool does not abandon dreaming, fear, grief, despair, and arrogance, that steadfastness, O Partha, is called tamasic. Interesting verse. Let's take this up word by word. Yaya, by which? Swapnam, dreaming. Bhayam, fear. Shokam, grief. Vishadam is despair, despondency. Madam is arrogance. Ave, indeed. Cha, and na, not. Vimunjati, abandons, discards. Durmedha is a fool. Medha is an intelligent person. Durmedha becomes a person without intelligence, a fool. Dhriti, the adjective dhriti, so that Parth is Arjun's name. Tamasi is the guna tamas. So the steadfastness with which a fool does not abandon dreaming, fear, grief, despair, and arrogance, that steadfastness, O Parth, is called tamasic. So let's chant it together. Yaya swapnam bhayam chokam vishadam madmeva cha na vimunchati durmedha dhriti sa parth tamasi. So in chapter 14, the Gunatraya Vibhag Yog, verse number 13, we had talked about the symptoms of tamas: dullness, inertia, heedlessness, and delusion. Now, dhriti or determination is also there in an unintelligent person, an ignorant person, a criminal, a murderer, a terrorist. In fact, at times you will find that they are more committed to the cause, to whatever they believe in, right? A terrorist, for example, is very, very committed. So that steadfastness, they also have that. Everyone, actually, all human beings have a steadfastness. So, but this steadfastness, in case of when it arises from ignorance, is tamasic. Now, what is interesting is that a lot of us fall in this category very frequently. So, see, a simplest example is that we all are scared of something, so we have a fear complex, and we hold on to it with great tenacity, as if it's a part of our personality. Actually, I mean, a fear of, let's say, flying, it's without logic. So many flights, or so many millions of people are flying every day from one place to another across the world, but a person who's scared of flying is always apprehensive before boarding a plane. So that has become part of our personality. And fear of flying, for, as an example, this is just an example, makes us vulnerable before each flight we take. Similarly, you have, fear of closed spaces, fear of heights. Actually, all those terms which contain the word phobia, so claustrophobia and so on and so forth, are actually our fears. And they are arising from ignorance. And when we suffer from any of these phobias, they are actually a part of our personality. So we cling on to this. So this negative determination is due to our lack of understanding that this fear is unfounded. So individuals with perfect discrimination were sattvic, of sattvic dhriti, where the discrimination is moderate. Sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't have it. Those are rajasic, uh, of rajasic dhriti. And where we don't, in situations where we lack discrimination completely, those are the times when we are functioning under the influence of or under tamasic dhriti. And also, verse 9 of chapter 14. See, to understand the gunas, chapter 14 is very important. The Gunatraya Vibhag Yoga, where all this was discussed in great detail. So, verse number 9 of that chapter had mentioned that tamas covers knowledge. And here in verse number 22 of this chapter, we had talked about tamasic understanding as without reason. The word used was I had to come. So it's illogical. Atatva arthvat, that means has no basis in truth. And alpam, that is, it's partial, superficial, trivial. But the dull tamasic clings to that partial knowledge, interpreting it as a whole. And we tend to hold on to this part fanatically. So, tamasic buddhi, because it is shrouded by ignorance, interprets everything in the wrong way. And actually, it is the worst form of bondage. And because these negative feelings that we develop as a result of our tamasic buddhi, they plague our personality. And this verse is talking about the 5 negative values that a tamasic person follows, or the tamasic dhriti follows. Swapnam, dream, fancies, imaginations, delusions, things which do not exist. So the person seems to be living in a dream or a dull. Dreams are normally when we are in a dull, drowsy, imaginary state. Bhayam, which is fear, because these dreams and delusions will throw up fear and apprehensions, just as we discussed in the fear of flying. So before each flight, we are apprehensive if we have fear of flying. So we are insecure. The point is, we hold on to our fears with great tenacity and make them a part of our personality. Then we come to the words shokam, grief, vishadam, despondency, depression, madam is arrogance. All these are a direct result of ignorance and delusion. So, such a person who does not give up these 5 is being called a durmedha or a fool in this verse. So, tamasic dhriti is what? It is that steadfastness with which we cling to our negativities, the vulgar values, the baser, the lower values. And it is that steadfastness with which we do not actually, not tend, we do not give up our imaginations, fears, agitations, and this will lead to griefs, sorrows, despondency, depression, and arrogance. This is tamasic dhriti. So, with that, we conclude our today's session.